Hello, my name is Rishi Supra. I'm a senior consultant at Altius, and today I'll be taking you through the approach I've taken for the Data Prep Challenge as part of the Data Insight Summit 2017. So I've approached this project like it was a client project over at Altius and worked at it in a series of sprints, of agile sprints. So I had 3 weeks to complete this, and I broke that down into 1 week for planning and scoping, 1 week for preparing the data prep, and 1 week for doing the data visualization. In this presentation, I'll focus on the planning activities, the scoping activities, and the approach I took to building the data preparation. So these are the 3 steps that we'll look at in this presentation. So the first stage of scoping is to look at the user requirements. And this is what we have from the website, from the community blog. And it says that we want to look at, we have detailed data for visitors, including expenditures of where people travelled from, and we want to know where people are visiting from. Has there been any interesting shifts in regions? So this doesn't really give us much to go on. I have had worse in terms of client requirements, but as far as they go, this isn't really particularly detailed. However, it's enough for us to be able to have a stab and make some assumptions about what we think the Hawaii Tourist Authority would want to know. So this is a BI scoping template which I've completed for a number of clients. We look at the user or the audience, in this case the Hawaii Tourism Authority, and then we look at particular areas, so looking at island analysis or spend, and we look at the key questions that they would have potentially on this area. So for example, on general Hawaii analysis, we look at how many visitors come to Hawaii each period, how does the number of visitors vary throughout the year, is there any seasonality, and is this linked to specific events or occasions? We can then come up with a series of KPIs and measures to see which measures would answer those key questions and what we would want to view and filter those measures by in order to be able to get the analysis that we require. Finally, at a very high level, we look at the data points that we need in order to be able to answer those questions or produce those metrics and whether we have those data currently available. So this is quite a neat one-pager which allows you to be able to scope a BI exercise overall. Also, as part of scoping, we need to look at the current state. So we make some assumptions around what the current pain points are of the Hawaii Tourism Authority. So looking at their files, we can see that their data collection is likely to be disjointed because they capture the same metrics, just at different levels of granularity. And it seems the numbers are not even necessarily consistent between the different files that they have. The format of their data capture is in large, onerous spreadsheet tables, which are quite difficult to use for reporting. It seems like there's a lot of data captured, so there were many data sources that were linked to in that report, but there's a high degree of duplication. And finally, we could also have a look at some non-functional requirements with them. So, for example, they might want to have a reporting solution that could be shared across multiple team members within the Hawaii Tourism Authority. Next, we come on to planning. Now, this is a really important activity, having done the scoping. And the first step of planning the activity is to understand what we're working with. So what I've done first is listed out all of the different data sources that were on there and given each one a reference. So A being the A1 to 3 being the first 3 tabs in the first workbook, 15, B1 to 15 being all the tabs in the second workbook, historical analysis, and C being the tabs in the 2015 highlight spreadsheet. So we've just given a description of each of those, and this allows us to be able to take stock of the various data sources that we have. But once we have that, then it's important to perform some kind of analysis on this. So to see, well, actually, what commonality do we have between these? And which ones do each of them show? Which ones we want to use? So for this, I've come up with measures and granularity analysis. So it shows all the various metrics and measures that are in the historical analysis data sources, and I've plotted which dimensions, or indeed which granularity of dimensions, are those measures available by in each of those different reports. So we can see here, for example, the number of visitors is in all of these reports by these levels of granularity, or these dimensions. Some of them have them by island level, some of them have them by month, some of them have them by year only, and some of them have them by country and major marketing area. Now, this analysis allows us to do quite a few things, but one of them is to be able to see whether there's some data sources which we don't require at all. And that might be the case where we have 2 data sources with one being at a lower level of granularity than the other. For example, if we have two data sources that have exactly the same dimensions, but one has month and one only has year, then we may as well take the one with month and year, because we can always aggregate up in the reporting layer, but we can't drill down into a grain that doesn't exist. We also want to look at whether there's scope to combine data sources together. So in particular, whether we have a set of dimensions and we have one data source that has visitor numbers by this set of dimensions and one that has visitor days. And that would allow us to, by those dimensions, analyze the average number of days spent per visitor. So we could just divide one by the other, and we have those two metrics in one set of dimensions. So this is highlighted here in this next page in the methodology that we're looking at. So we select tables which have the lowest possible grain, and we ignore tables that have the same measures at a higher grain than another one. The data sources with different measures but by the same dimensions could be combined. And we also have to do some prioritization of key metrics. So here I focused on visitor numbers and primarily historical analysis and that of expenditure, but I haven't really focused on visitors staying overnight or returning Hawaii residents. So I've not considered those to be key metrics. With this analysis, what this has allowed me to do is come up with the reporting tables that I think would be most useful to have in the Power BI dashboard. And these are the various fact tables that we can then generate in the data prep activity. So the first three that we have here are statewide analysis and on a monthly level. So we have monthly visitor numbers and visitor days, and monthly expenditure and visitor numbers. So the visitor numbers and visitor days, this is what it will allow us to calculate average spend per visitor. But the only grain we have that by common across the two data sources, one that has visitor numbers, one that has visitor days, is category. So this is the only grain at which we can calculate this fact table at. Then we have in R4 to R7, we have island analysis. And some of those are monthly, so visitor numbers and monthly expenditure and visitor numbers. Though by country, if we wanted to look at that, and by category, we're only able to see those on an annual level. So we don't have a data source currently available that allows us to do that at a lower grain, so we have to stick with annual. But I think we could still gather quite a lot of information from here, so I think this would still be quite a useful set of reporting tables to have. And lastly, in R8, we have the 2015 highlights. So I've taken some of the first few tabs off here and combined them to say we can have a reporting table that has metrics around purpose of visit, accommodation, the number of islands visited, and the dimension we have on there is major marketing area. So this activity here has now allowed us to scope which tables we want to generate, which are end reporting tables we want, our fact tables, and what the sources are behind those. So we can see that this one we need B7, this one we need B3 and B7, this one we need B12 and B7, and so on. So now this allows us to provide a framework for the activity that we're going to do as part of the data prep. Now, what I've done here is provided a worked example for transforming one of those spreadsheets into a usable reporting table. So we can see, this is one of the spreadsheets, the one that I've given a reference of B7 to. So this is a screenshot of that Excel file, and we can see that it has different blocks, and we have for each block, we have going across the top here in one row, we have the countries, or indeed MMAs here, and then we have the MMA header as a row here, and this goes on. And then down the left, we have months for a year, and we have that block repeated for total, domestic, and international. And the numbers in here are all the visitor numbers. And so for each of the years, 1989 to 2015. Now, what we can do with this is use these tables and actually convert them using the Power Query code to convert it into a table that we can use for reporting. So one where we have year, category, month, and then by country ID and by major marketing ID, the total number of visitors. So this is the ideal format for reporting, and what I'm going to run through now is how the approach I've taken from transforming this Excel file into something that looks like this. The first step I took with this was to break down that Excel file into blocks. And we can see there's quite a neat divide here of blocks. So we can see rows 3 to 16 here have a one block, and this is total for 1989. The second block is domestic for 1989. The third block is International for 1989. What I then did was produced a helper table in Excel with the start and end row and title of each block. So I just dragged down the years, so it started with 1989 and dragged them down for each of the categories, and then did a lookup function to see where we see that label in the Excel spreadsheet, and extended it by a certain number of rows to get the row start and the row end and the label for the one where it starts. Now we could use this table then to be able to then perform our Power Query activity. So the next step was to write a function using the Power Query UI and editing the M code to clean it up a little bit, to transpose and clean the data in each block. So what I did first was actually added an index column to the Excel file that it was imported in, so the B7 spreadsheet. I added an index column to that, and then I manually filtered it for one of the blocks. So say block 1, I manually filtered for start row 3, end row 16, and then I transposed that function, I transposed the data in that block and got it into the format that I needed to. I then went in and tidied up some of the M code and removed the hashes and the spaces and the variable names, for example, and I put the row start and the row end as parameters that feed into the function. That allows me then to use this as a reusable bit of code against all of the various different blocks. The next step is to then go back to this helper table and use these row start and row end columns to be able to use that function, invoke that function to obtain the transposed, cleaned version of the data for that block. So this table here represents the data in this block here, which starts at row 20 and finishes at row 33. And we do that by invoking a custom column, adding a custom column and invoking the function B7 block, passing in the row start, the row end, and the label. What we can then do with our helper table is then use this expand icon in order to get the data from each of these tables. And this just performs a union on each data table, and it gives us all together for all of the blocks into a data set that we can then use. And that's it. So this is now then the completed set of the get data queries. And the PBIX file is available to download if you want to have a look at this in more detail. But the key elements to draw out here are the various different groups that I have for the various helper tables, for functions, for each report. So the tables used as part of each report are broken down into their own groups, and this makes it easier for the person looking at this to know how everything relates to each other. I've also got a reference in here where I've listed out the reporting tables and the sources, so what we've seen earlier in this presentation, and also all of the various different data sources, the list of all the data sources and the codes. So this then helps someone who hasn't seen this presentation to still be able to make sense of all of the queries that are happening in here. The only other thing to note here is I've renamed all the step names to make them more legible, and organized everything and put it into a structure that I think works for someone to look at. So that's the end of the presentation. Thank you for watching this, and if you have any questions or comments on it, please feel free to drop me an email. My email address is here. Thank you.